Hi, welcome to the course Wine Appreciation, the Basics. If you are watching this right now, probably you're already into the world of wine and want to expand your knowledge about this extraordinary drink. And for me, actually, it was exactly the same. I became interested in wine when traveling and filming videos. One day, I filmed a winery in Armenia, it's the country in the Caucasus region, arguably the cradle of wine, arguably because Georgia also claims to be the cradle of wine. But anyway, I loved the whole process of making wine, from cultivating the grapes to pressing the juice and making the wine. Then I studied at WSET to become a sommelier, then started to do some consulting, started a YouTube channel, and I really want to share all that I know now about wine with you. In this course, named The Basics, we won't go too deep into regions and producers and grape varieties. This is meant to be a guide to start a journey in the world of wine effortlessly and at the same time gain the necessary knowledge to understand how the grapes are cultivated, what are the factors that affect the price and quality of the wine, what is the difference between white and red wine making, and all that gives you a clear picture of what wine actually is. There won't be too much snobbish terms and wine-related pathos here, but anyway, you'll be ahead of like 95% of people in the world with this wine knowledge, because for really a lot of people, wine is just white or red. And if we can change this approach to wine, I think we can make the world just a bit better. Okay, enough talking, let's start the first chapter, which is vine growing, climatic conditions that affect the grapes, and how the equilibrium of factors form the vague concept the French call terroir. The art of viticulture is foundational to the quality of wine because it is really an art. It's just too many unknowns involved. This narrative is woven through the interaction of soil, climate, vine management, and human touch. It's a complex of all these factors that form the conditions for vine growing. Everything starts with the soil. The basic rule here is if the soil is great for growing potatoes, it won't be good for vine. What I mean here is that grassy fertile soils are not the best match for vine growing. Different types of soils offer unique benefits to the vines, like limestone soils, for example, are prized for their drainage capabilities and their ability to reflect sun, meaning a bit of additional light necessary to grow the grapes in cooler regions. Clay soils retain moisture, which can be beneficial in dry regions, producing more dense wines. Sandy soils, meanwhile, provide excellent drainage, and that can help prevent vines from diseases because water drains well and doesn't create damp conditions for microorganisms to propagate. Like, all the water drains down the sand and the wine is safe from rot, basically. The aspect or the direction a vineyard faces plays a crucial role in grape ripening. South-facing slopes, like in the northern hemisphere, receive more sunlight, promoting ripening. The more north the vineyard is located, the steeper are the sun rays that hit the grapes. So at the equator, sun rays hit at 90%, but at the poles half a year there is no light at all. The sun rays doesn't penetrate there. So at 50 degrees latitude, it's something in between the equator and the poles, meaning that sun rays fall like 45 degrees. And if we turn the slope with the vineyard a little bit towards the sun, it will help the grapes to get more sun and to ripen well. That's basically how it works. And this principle flips in the southern hemisphere. And the main rule of thumb here is that the vine should suffer. It's like a human being, without struggle, it's not possible to achieve any success, and it's not possible to make great wine from grapes harvested on a flat, hot plot of land. In cooler regions, the best grapes are grown on more sun-exposed slopes, and in hot regions, best wines should benefit from some cooling. It may be the altitude above the sea level, some cool breeze from the ocean, slopes that protect the grapes from excessive sunburn. But anyway, there should be some kind of moderating factor which limits the peaks of the temperature. Higher elevation exposes vines to cooler temperatures and greater sunlight intensity, which can lead to a slower, more balanced ripening process. This elevation can contribute to a blend of freshness and complexity in wine, with some notable examples coming from regions like Mendoza, Argentina, and the Mosel Valley in Germany. The way vines are treated also affects the exposure to sunlight and airflow. There are some of them, for instance, the Guyot system with its single or double canes. It is common in Burgundy and promotes well-distributed leaf canopy, aiding in even grape ripening. This one is used more in moderate climates like Burgundy, Loire Valley, because it exposes the grapes to more sun, and in cooler regions it is necessary to get as much sun as possible so that the grapes could ripen completely. Another kind of system is pergola system, often used in Italy. It trains vines overhead like this, which can protect grapes from sunburn in some hotter climates. There is also bush vine type of training, which is basically a big bush of vine leaves protecting the grapes from sunburn. It is the most extreme training system, I believe. It is used in hotter regions like some parts of Australia, Sicily, sometimes in California. The leaves create shade for the grapes even in the hottest afternoons so that the flavors and aromas don't burn, and it contributes to better wine basically. There are other types of wine training, like a form of a nest where the bunches are in the center to protect the grapes from wind. They call it basket-like training. This one is widely spread, particularly in windy Greek islands, but it's for sure not the most common style of wine training. Pruning shapes the vine and controls yield. Fewer grape clusters can mean more concentrated flavors. Sometimes wine growers cut some buds to give more nutrients and energy to the resting grapes in order to achieve better quality fruit. So the yields go down, but at the same time, the quality of the grapes and consequently the price of the wine as well, they go up. Canopy management is also important, including trimming leaves. It's also important to ensure adequate sunlight and air circulation. It is crucial in preventing disease and promoting even ripening. Like if there is a lot of leaves and not a lot of air circulating them, there may be more space for some diseases, microorganisms, etc. If the leaves are rare, there is little space for diseases, but it's not possible to do that in cooler climates because dense leaves protect the grapes from cold. So dense leaves are necessary and important in cooler climates. All these factors form some kind of an equilibrium, you know? If you eliminate the disease for vine, you expose it to cold. Alternatively, you can heat up the whole vineyard by putting heat fans by the sides, and that costs some money. Or you can just burn wood in order to heat the vineyard in winter cold. Sometimes they do it in the north of Burgundy. They collect dry vines and then burn them in winter to heat up the whole vineyard. Wine grower is like a gymnast balancing on the edge of a log, trying not to fall down. They try to find the ideal combination of all these factors to create wine. It's the product of nature, mind labor, and hand labor as well. If one of these three parts fails, the wine won't be great. If the weather wasn't good this year, too damp during the harvest, or not enough sun or hail, well, it is possible to make some wine, but definitely it won't be great. That is why top vintages of top wines cost more than the normal vintages. That is why the Champagne Dom Perignon is not produced every year. They select the best vintages and make wines only these years when the weather conditions are optimal. And then we have mind labor. If the winemaker made a wrong decision about the time of the harvest, frost hit the vines and the winemaker didn't make anything to protect them, or he just let the wine ferment for more time than needed, probably it won't be a good wine. And finally, hand labor. Hand harvesting the grapes, pressing, maceration, all that kind of stuff. In small family wineries, it is all often done manually by the members of the family, so it requires a lot of physical strength from people. Choosing when to harvest is one of the viticulturist's most critical decisions. Too early and the grapes may lack flavor and sugar, too late and they might have too much sugar and not enough acidity. This delicate balance defines the wine's structure and style of the wine. It also depends on the grape variety. Like in Chardonnay, the acidity level drops really fast after ripening, so a nice rounded, well high in acidity, well made high in acidity Chardonnay with at the same time completely developed aromas is a very good Chardonnay. This is why Chardonnays from Burgundy are so valued. This grape variety ripens in Burgundy but doesn't lose its flavors and aromas due to sunburn while preserving lots of acidity. And remember about that balance, right? That's another clear illustration of this. The overall temperature of the region is perhaps one of the most significant factors in determining the wine style. Cooler climates, such as those parts in France, New Zealand, some northern Italy, probably tend to produce wines with high acidity and more subtle fruit flavors, like probably a bit of greenish aromas, some green apple, gooseberry, probably sometimes not completely ripened. These conditions are ideal for grapes like Pinot Noir, sometimes Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling. Warmer climates like those in California, Australia, Spain allow grapes to ripen completely, resulting in wines with higher alcohol content because of the sugar, also fuller body, ripe, juicy flavors suitable for this climate, suitable for varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Grenache, that kind of thing. Again, it doesn't mean that Chardonnay from hot places is not good. Just Chardonnay from Sicily is a totally different style of wine than a Chablis, for instance. If there is Sauvignon Blanc from cooler Loire Valley, which is one of my favorites, honestly, and there is Sauvignon Blanc from warmer places like in New Zealand, it is also great. It all depends on your personal preferences, and that is the essence of wine. It could be very different. That is why it is so interesting. The temperature variation between day and night, it is called diurnal range, is also crucial for balancing grapes, sugars and acid levels. A significant drop in temperature at night helps maintain the acidity, and acidity is the key component of the wine body. It decreases the body so that the wine wouldn't seem too heavy, like wine on steroids, you know? A lot of people like 15% ABV alcohol, full-bodied red wines, but very few people like overly heavy, too meaty, like over-the-top red wines. And here, the acidity may play a crucial role to balance all that full body, all that alcohol, and all that stuff. There are a lot of areas all over the world with pronounced diurnal range, such as Napa Valley in California or Mendoza in Argentina. These regions are renowned for producing balanced and complex wines. Not all of them, obviously. Why do plain lands very rarely produce high-quality grapes? Like a very simple question. Because there is little diurnal range. In the mountains, it is hot during the day because of the sun, but during the night, temperature drops radically. And vine rests from sunburn, accumulating flavors, aromas, getting ready to accumulate sugars during the day, like consuming the sun. Rainfall affects vine growth and grape quality as well. If there is too much rain, especially close to harvest time, it can dilute flavors, increase the risk of rot, and unbalance the grape's sugar to acid ratio. Conversely, too little water stresses the wines, potentially concentrating flavors but also risking the health of the wine because wine needs water. Wine regions often rely on a delicate balance, with some of them like Bordeaux, for instance, facing challenges from vintage to vintage due to varying rainfall. In France, and particularly in Bordeaux, the rain may be very harmful because it creates wet conditions, damp conditions, good for diseases. And also, rain means that the sky is cloudy and there is little sun necessary to accumulate sugars in the grapes. But if we talk about some hot region like Spanish Jumilla, for instance, region, it's a very hot region in the south of Spain, it is totally the opposite. Rain is so rare in this region that it's a blessing when the sky is cloudy and protecting the grapes from constant sunburn and elevated temperatures, and rain gives some water to the vines. It is once again about the balance and the struggle, basically like everything in humans' lives. Wind as well can cool a vineyard, slower grape ripening, and reduce the risk of propagation of different microorganisms by promoting air circulation. Sunlight is also necessary for photosynthesis of the leaves of grapes. Too much sunburn can lead to just sunburned grapes and overly rapid ripening. Sometimes they even give specific name to specific wind currents, similarly to ocean currents. Like in their own valley, this region benefits from mistral wind, which keeps the air clean and the vines healthy, and also gives some relief from constant sunburn, decreasing a bit the temperature. Early and late frosts also can damage vines, particularly their buds and fruit, the grapes, affecting the yield and quality of the harvest. Hail as well can have a devastating effect on the vineyards, physically damaging, physically hitting the grapes. The only thing to protect the grapes from hail is like installing hail nets, which is quite effective. The nets limit the sun effect on the grapes. To protect against frost, they use heaters to elevate the temperature in winter near the vineyard, just probably a couple degrees, and that couple degrees rise protects the vines from damage. And right now, the world is rapidly changing, and the world of wine is rapidly changing as well. Regions traditionally too cool for certain varieties are seeing changes, while others must adapt to increased heat or some extreme weather conditions. Like they grow grapes in the south of Norway now. Isn't it a sign of some climatic changes? And in the south of Italy, for instance, they struggle with extremely high alcohol in wine because there is so much sugar in the grapes that the wine just gets 15, 15.5, 16, 16.5 ABV, which is insane for natural non-fortified wines. Just to sum it all up, the grapes as a human being should suffer in order to give birth to a great wine. And the terroir depends on a lot of factors which complement one another. And in the end, the wine in your bottle is a product of this like equilibrium, the equilibrium of mind labor, hand labor, and the weather, the climate. That is why wine is so complicated, and that is why there are a lot of wines that cost 100, 1,000 times more than the others. And that is why each wine is a really unique thing. In the next chapter, we are going to talk about how red wine is made, what's the difference between cheap and quality red wines, and basically about red wine a little bit more in detail. Stay tuned. Making red wine may seem the simplest thing in the world. You just take some black grapes, crush them, then the fermentation starts naturally, and basically that is it. You already have some red wine. But in order to make great or at least good red wine, a lot of knowledge, effort, and some luck is needed. Let's start with the harvest. The journey of red wine making begins in the vineyard with the crucial decision of when to harvest the grapes. The timing must ensure optimal ripeness where the grapes have achieved a perfect balance between sugar, acidity, and phenolic compounds which determine the primary flavors and aromas of the future wine. If we take it really simple, the main principle is grow high-quality grapes and you will be able to make great wine. We already know what it takes to cultivate good quality grapes. Let's assume that we already have these grapes and just need to make outstanding red wine. Once harvested, grapes are taken to the winery where they are typically destamped and crushed. Typically, but not always. Sometimes winemakers just decide to let the grapes stay intact without crushing. This technique is called whole bunch fermentation. It can be carbonic maceration, semi-carbonic maceration, and mixing whole bunches with crushed grapes. Carbonic maceration means that whole bunches of grapes are placed into big stainless steel vats which are filled with CO2 to prevent contact with oxygen and let the intracellular fermentation make its work. They just fill the vats with CO2 and just let the grapes be there. In some time, so-called intracellular fermentation starts. It means that small amounts of alcohol are being produced inside each of the grapes. Then the grape splits. The skin is crushed naturally without using any machinery. The juice is released and the mast continues to ferment naturally. Semi-carbonic maceration is basically almost the same process, with the only difference that there is no CO2 filling in this stainless steel tank. The grapes that are at the bottom of the tank split naturally under the weight of other grapes, and then the fermentation begins. Yeast eats sugar and produce alcohol as a byproduct. They also produce some CO2 also naturally, and this natural CO2 fills all the tank from the bottom to the top. So basically we have achieved the same results but without filling the tanks with CO2 artificially. All these whole bunches methods are used to add some characteristic banana and bubblegum flavors to wine. If you taste something like banana or chewing gum in wine, that is definitely whole bunch fermentation used. They do quite a lot of it in Burgundy from time to time, especially in Beaujolais. So if you like Beaujolais, it means that you'll probably like any wine made with carbonic maceration using whole bunches or the mixture of whole bunches and crushed grapes. But back to the normal method. The grapes are crushed mechanically, the juice is released, and the fermentation starts. Normally red wines are fermented at 20 to 32 degrees Celsius or about 68 to 19 degrees Fahrenheit. The warmer the temperature is, the more tannins, phenolic compounds, and generally more taste will be extracted from the skins, the seeds, and the stems if the stems are added. Yes, sometimes the stems are also added to the grape must to give some more like this greenish woody tannin to the wine. But on the other hand, it might give some not very ripe greenish to greenish tannins, which may result in a not very pleasant taste in the final wine. Okay, the winemaker controls the temperature depending on the style of the wine. Sometimes he turns the cap of the grape skins and seeds up and down to cover it with juice once again. Technically, this process is called cap management. There are several techniques of this cap management, and these also may differ from just punching down the cap with a big wooden stick. It is the most basic method. French call it pigeage. That is the strongest one. It elevates a lot the extraction of any components in the wine. And also there are more gentle methods like pumping up the juice and wetting the cap with this juice. The whole process goes from like 1 to 3 weeks basically, but the time really depends a lot on a lot of factors. It can be more, it can be less as well. And then the fermentation is finished. All the sugar in the grape juice is transformed into alcohol by the yeast, and the wine is almost ready. The producer may just clarify and stabilize the wine so that it would be pure without any sediment in it. Sometimes they don't do it, just there are a lot of unfiltered red wines as well, or with some particles at the bottom of the bottle, and then they bottle the wine and just sell it straight away. But in a lot of cases they use some maturation to enrich the wine with some additional flavors and aromas, which may elevate the complexity and consequently price of the wine. Maturation is basically the process of just letting the wine lay peacefully in some kind of a vessel in order to develop the desired aromas. Most common kinds of maturation are barrel aging and bottle aging, which respectively gives wine secondary and tertiary aromas. We'll speak about secondary and tertiary aromas a little bit more in detail in the chapter about wine tasting. So happened that barrel aging is the most common in oak vessels. There are some cases when wine is being aged in some other kind of wood, like for instance in Croatia, sometimes they use acacia to make the barrels, but in 99.9% wine is aged in just oak. The oak vessels may be smaller, which gives a bigger surface of contact between wine and wood, and as a consequence more oaky aromas incorporated into the wine. It can be a huge oak vat which contains several tons of wine, and in this case the maturation process will go a lot slower and the aromas will develop slower as well. But generally wine needs wood for just a couple of reasons. Firstly, to incorporate some specific wooden aromas, and secondly, to oxidize the wine just a tiny bit but in a slow, controlled way in order to develop more like meaty, savory aromas, some oxidation aromas, sometimes like nutty, sometimes like caramel. Well, oxidation aromas really depend on the type of the wine. And barrel maturation may go for quite a long time. For some wines it's 6 months, for others it's a year, sometimes up to several years for red wines. It depends on the grapes, on the style of wine, and the decisions of the winemaker, if he wants to produce a more light-bodied wine or more like bold wine on steroids. And then there is a further option to mature the wines in bottle. Bottle aging also may take several years, as well before the wine is released to sale. Also, you can continue bottle aging at home as long as you have some appropriate conditions. Ideally, it may be a wine fridge or just a cellar or a temperature controlled room with constant humidity and about 55-60 degrees Fahrenheit or about 15 degrees Celsius. If we rise the bottle aging temperature, we make the maturation processes in wine go faster, and if the wine is stored above like 20 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit, it will just cook and develop unpleasant aromas over the time. It is still possible to store wine at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, but not for too long. What bottle aging does is basically converting primary aromas into tertiary aromas. Again, we'll talk more in detail about that in the wine tasting chapter, but generally, primary aromas are like fruity notes in the wine, like red fruit, black fruit, and they are converted into cooked fruit, dried fruit, preserved fruit. Like if in a young wine we have plum, it will become prune after bottle aging. If we have cherry in a young one, it will be dried cherry in the tertiary aromas. The logic here is quite simple. So we basically take fresh fruit and then we dry or cook or preserve it. And sometimes during more prolonged bottle aging, some earthy mushroom-like aromas may appear, but it again depends on the particular wine, the style of the wine, and the grapes used. And here we've come to the most interesting part about red wine: how to understand if it is a good red wine or a bad red wine. What is the difference between quality red wines and plonk red wines? First of all, it is about the quality of the grapes. It goes without saying. Wine from good quality grapes normally has potential for aging, which is very important for the final price and the final quality of the wine, because all of the most expensive wines in the world have undergone some sufficient period of time of maturation in oak and then in bottle. So if the grapes have sufficient primary aromas, they are fruity, they have a lot of these components, they may develop tertiary aromas during the maturation. Of course, there are good quality young red wines which may cost up to $100 per bottle, I believe, but it's almost impossible to imagine $1,000 bottle of wine which was made like a year or 2 years ago. Wine is very human thing, I think. Not because humans drink wine, but because wine behaves like humans. When it's young, it's fresh and provoking, but over the past of the years, it becomes more reserved. Like as we humans get wisdom, the wine gets the layers of its flavors. All this is impossible without very high quality grapes. If the grapes are bad, there will be no material to work with. If it is a cheap wine, the grapes are normally harvested, if possible, by machine, because hand labor costs more in developed countries. In less developed countries, hand labor is very cheap. Winemakers sometimes prefer to pay the workers to pick the grapes instead of buying the whole machine, which also may result a bit pricey for the winery. Then the grapes are pressed and fermented without any further maturation, just in big stainless steel tanks. Then they are stabilized with some significant amount of SO2, because sulfites protect wine from oxidation and also from microorganisms as well. So adding SO2 is a good way to make sure that the wine will be okay during the transportation or on the shelf of the supermarket. SO2 is just a safe choice, which is not very good. Too much SO2 is not very good for high quality wines. And basically, that is it. The bottles are sealed with some plastic or agglomerated cork or just a screw cap. All these types of closures are cheaper than high quality natural cork. The wine goes directly to the distributors and then to the shelves of the supermarkets. That is it. The majority of wine in the world is made like this just because it is cost effective. A bottle of wine made like this won't cost more than $5, $7, probably $10, depending on the country, the taxes, sometimes even less than that. And people drink it. There is nothing wrong with that. It is safe to drink in most cases. Probably it lacks some complexity that wine lovers enjoy in wine, but still, it is wine that 90% of people in the world drink at least several times a week, and it's perfectly fine. It's a it's okay. On the other side of the spectrum, we have quality wine production, and here there are a lot more options available. Winemakers may decide to use whole bunches, they may decide to use different cap management techniques, sometimes they decide not to add SO2 as well, so that the wine goes completely organic, or reduce the amount of SO2 to the minimum possible. Then they may decide to mature the wine in big vats or smaller barrels, use new oak to give the kind of more oaky notes to wine, or they may prefer to use used oak, which is basically cheaper because it is reused and the price of the barrel is not shared entirely among all the bottles of wine matured in one particular barrel. Then they may store wine in the winery cellars for some time for bottle aging, which as well costs some money because these bottles occupy place in the cellar. More expensive wines are normally sealed with high quality natural cork, but today this rule starts to be more or less vague. I'd say there are outstanding wines that cost more than $100 per bottle and they're sealed with a simple screw cap, so it also depends on the producer. But like top wines are always sealed with a cork because screw caps, they just don't allow any oxygen inside the bottle, and a tiny bit of oxygen is still needed for very long bottle aging. And if we're talking about like periods of time, like 10 years, probably even more. A natural cork breathes very well, so it gradually improves the quality of the wine, very slowly, but it is an advantage of a natural cork. Okay, I hope that now it's more or less clear about the red wines, and we are ready to talk about white wines now. Stay tuned. Some wine snobs think that the only true wine is red wine, and white wine is less complicated, almost like a byproduct of wine production. But personally, I think that white wine can be as great as red wine. It's just a little bit different, and about all these differences we are about to talk now. It all starts as well with the quality of the grapes. As usual, in white wine, grape quality sometimes is related to the name of the grape, like there is difference between Pinot Grigio and Pinot Gris. It is basically the same grape, but the Italian name is used to state more fresh, fruity, less complicated style of wine, sometimes even lower quality wine. And the French one, Pinot Gris, is the name for more complicated, full-bodied, sometimes oaky variants of wines made from this grape. And even inside the Italian family of Pinot Grigio, there are different clones. There is a clone with big watery pulp cultivated in vast vineyards in Veneto province. This one gives more juice, but it lacks aromas and flavors. And there is another clone which is cultivated in cooler regions with hills to the north and to the west from Veneto, which is considered to produce just better quality wines because these grapes are a bit smaller in size, but the juice is more concentrated. It's just a little example that hopefully proves that some white wines are not as simple as some people think of them, and consequently they deserve our attention as well. The main difference of white wine from red wine is that in order to make white wine, we don't ferment grape juice with the skins and seeds of the grapes. We just separate them. Well, there is a way of fermenting white grapes with all the skins and seeds and sometimes even stems, but then the wine won't be white. It will be orange or amber wine. It is a very interesting style of wine. It is particularly popular in Georgia and basically in all of the countries of the Caucasus region. In France, also some wineries produce amber wines. Basically, it is a white wine with amber color from the skins and some tannins to it. Typically, it has the aromas of like apricot, dried apricot, preserved fruit, more not on the fresh side, but on the dried fruit side sometimes. Well, it's rather interesting. But let's talk more about the classical white wine. So we take only juice without seeds and stems and ferment it. The fermentation temperature in this case is a bit cooler than in red wines production because in white wines we don't need to extract tannins and color from the skins and seeds. Normally the temperature is between 12 and 22 degrees Celsius or 52 to like 70 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit depending on the desirable style of the wine. And then there are three options that a winemaker can go for, or just ignore these options. The first option is malolactic conversion. Let's imagine a green apple. It's very acidic, almost making teeth itch. These apples contain a lot of malic acids. This is basically how malic acid tastes like a green apple, not ripened green apple. And let's imagine a yogurt or a cottage cheese or some kefir. These products also have a bit of acidity to it, but not that much, obviously less than an unripe green apple. These dairy products contain lactic acid. So the process of malolactic conversion is the conversion of malic acid into lactic acid in wine, just simple as that. Malolactic conversion, it is a natural process which takes place just after the alcoholic fermentation. In most cases, it happens naturally. In red wines, malolactic conversion, it goes without saying. It's just the normal process of red wine making. But making white wines, a winemaker may decide to let malolactic conversion go or just stop it, depending on the style of wine a winemaker wants to produce. If the desired style is more fresh, fruity wine with high acidity, like easy drinking, the malolactic conversion should be stopped. If we want to achieve some more reserved style, more full-bodied, more suitable for barrel aging, bottle aging, then we won't stop malolactic conversion. What malolactic conversion does is it adds some dairy product taste and aromas to wine. If you taste a Burgundy Chardonnay, there are often notes of cream, some butter probably. These are the characteristic notes of malolactic conversion. The wine becomes richer, more full-bodied, more complex, and if it is what the winemaker wants to achieve, malolactic conversion is a benefit. But if we want to make some easy drinking, simple, fruity wine with high acidity meant to be drunk young, this is the case when we want to stop malolactic conversion. So it's not about the right and the wrong decision, it's again about the style of the wine. In order to stop malolactic conversion, normally they add SO2 to wine. So if the wine is totally organic without any sulfides, then we assume that it underwent malolactic conversion. Otherwise, it would have been hard to stop it without any sulfides. Well, also sometimes they chill wine to prevent malolactic conversion, but mostly they do both, like chill and add SO2. The second thing a winemaker can do is to permit the least contact of the wine with the wine, or just filtrate the wine so that there would be no least contact. And after the fermentation, dead yeast fall down and form lees at the bottom. The gross lees are removed during racking, but the wine can be left in contact with the fine lees for some time just to add a bit of complexity to it, to add new different flavors to it. Lees contact adds some bread-like aromas to wine, like brioche, fresh bread, croissant. And the most interesting thing about that is it costs nothing to the winemaker. Like, you increase the complexity of the wine and potentially the price of the wine, and you don't need to spend a penny on it. If you want to age wine in a barrel, you need to buy that barrel, right? But if you want to allow lees contact, there is nothing you have to do. The lees are already there. So it is a simple and very cheap method to add complexity to the wine. But sometimes we want to create a simple, just youthful wine. We don't need this additional complexity, so we can just filtrate the yeast so there is no lees contact. And the third option is barrel and bottle aging, just the same as with red wines. Here it's almost the same as with red wines, with the only difference that white wines are normally aged during less time compared to red wines. Like, normal barrel aging for white wines may be around 6 months, sometimes even 3 months, rather rarely more than 1 year. Well, it really depends. Sherry wine is also a white wine, and it can be in this Solera Criadera system for just a lot of years. But basically, if we talk about natural still white wines, it is 3 months, 6 months, a year, sometimes a bit more than a year, but not very often. And with red wines, we go for 6 months, a year, 2 years, sometimes even more. So with bottle aging, it is basically, again, the same as with red wines. Fresh fruit converts into dried cooked fruit, with the only difference that We don't have red and black fruit in white wine. We don't have cherries or plums in white wines. Instead, it could be some citrus or stone fruit or tropical fruit, depending on the variety and the climatic conditions. So if in a youthful white wine we have apricot and mango, after some bottle aging, it will be some dried apricot and dried mango. Of course, there are some primary aromas that stay in the wine even after bottle aging, but some of them become dried, cooked, preserved, the same as in red wines. Sometimes white wines develop some other tertiary aromas like hay, honey, nutty, sometimes almonds, marzipan, depending on also a lot of things. But we won't go deep into that kind of thing because I think it's too complicated for now. And probably you already understand what the difference between mass market, simple, cheap white wines and quality white wines will be like. Cheap wines are meant to be simple, just pleasant, not very high in alcohol, mostly with simple primary aromas and fruits. These wines are made from medium quality grapes fermented at cooler temperatures, don't have any lees contact, they don't undergo malolactic conversion, neither they see oak or experience some bottle aging. These are meant to be drunk young, enjoyed on its own, or accompanied with some simple, everyday dish, just some fruit, this youthful, easygoing style of wine. Again, it is totally fine to drink this kind of wine. They are affordable, not high in alcohol, which is also beneficial for the health, and they are produced in big volumes in basically any wine-making region of any country of the world. The other way to approach white wines is to cultivate high-quality grapes, more concentrated on better plots of land and all that. Then try not to overuse SO2 in the winery. Then let the malolactic conversion make its work. Don't prevent lees contact to add some complexity. Then age this wine for like 6 months, probably more, in oak barrels, and then some time extra in the bottle. This is basically the approach which gives the best white wines in the world, like French Burgundy wines, California Chardonnay, like the best Rieslings from Australia and Germany. And it's not even correct to say that these wines are less involved than red wines because they involve a lot of labor, a lot of money as well for aging, like place in the cellar. And the plots of land themselves cost a bit more. And let me say a couple of words about rosé wines. These are not very popular among true wine lovers. Some say that they lack complexity and seem more like these teenage wines, and some of the rosé wines are really like that with a little bit of fizz. But on the other hand, there are very good rosé wines, and I just want to introduce the techniques used to make them. Some people think that rosé wines are just a blend of white and some red wine, and actually there are some cases when they do so. For instance, rosé champagne is made by adding some red wine to white wine, but in most regions this technique is prohibited, with rosé champagne being the most remarkable exception from this rule. The first actual method to make rosé is to press black grapes normally and then remove the skins as soon as possible. But as soon as possible means that there will be anyway a bit of contact between the juice and the grapes, the skins, the stems, the seeds, and that is why some color will be transferred from the skins to the juice. But because of the fact that the contact is very limited in terms of time, these rosé wines made using direct pressing, this is the name of this technique, direct pressing, these wines have a very subtle hint of rosé, very tender color, and no tannins at all. So basically, it's almost like white wine but made from black grapes. The other method is called short maceration in English and saigner in French, which is literally translated as bled. Black grapes are crushed and then the winemaker lets the juice in contact with the skins for 48 hours maximum in order to achieve a deeper pink color. It doesn't have to be necessarily 48 hours, maybe 24 hours, 12 hours, and even less. The main point here is to allow some contact between the juice and the skins to incorporate some color. This technique may be beneficial for making red wines, like we start the fermentation normally as for red wines, and then after some time we remove some part of the juice to make rosé wine. but the skins remain in contact with the rest of the juice in the main tank. And finally, we get some rosé wine of the desired color, because we can control the shade of pink color by deciding to remove the wine from the main tank earlier or let it be there for a bit longer. And in the main tank, we'll have more concentrated red wine, because now we have less juice with the same amount of skins. So all in all, we get more concentrated red wine. There are basically these three methods used to make rosé wine, like blending, direct pressing, saignée, or shot maceration, whatever you prefer. And okay, fine. In the next chapter, we'll talk about sparkling wines and some fortified wines a bit, and then we'll pass to the tasting part. See you. Okay, fine. Let's talk about sparkling wines. First things first. Every champagne is sparkling wine, but not every sparkling wine is champagne. Because in order to name a sparkling wine champagne, it should be A, from the Champagne region in France, and B, it should be made by using the traditional method, of which we'll talk a bit later in this chapter. This difference is quite important because sometimes, especially having dinner with the parents, they ask, oh, would you like a glass of champagne? And I feel like that is not champagne here, it's Prosecco. I know that it's a snobbish kind of thing, but champagne is really a very special sparkling wine. That is why it is so pricey. And let's go back a little bit to the vineyard, because in order to produce sparkling wine, we have to treat the vines differently. Firstly, for sparkling wine, we need grapes which are relatively low in sugar. The reason for that is the second fermentation. We don't want a sparkling wine to be like 15-16% ABV, right? And that is why the base wine should be very low in alcohol, like 10-11% ABV. And then there is the second fermentation to add the bubbles to the wine, which also increases the alcohol percentage by like 1%, 1.5%. So if we have grapes which have a lot of sugar, the wine will be high in alcohol. And then we add this 1.5% of alcohol on top of that, and the resulting wine becomes almost a port wine. And that's no good. Okay, so the first thing is low sugar. The second important thing for sparkling wine production is high acidity, because we want sparkling wine to be refreshing and crisp. Dull sparkling wine is just nonsense. But to achieve these two factors, low sugars and high acidity, we need the coolest climatic conditions possible. Remember the part about the sufferings of the vine? It is extremely true to sparkling wine, because in hot regions, sparkling wines tend to be higher in alcohol and less refreshing. And high in alcohol and not refreshing, it doesn't sound like a good sparkling wine at all. That is why champagne from France is so valuable and pricey. It is hard to cultivate grapes there, because Champagne is rather far north for wine growing, but for sparkling wines, these are the best conditions possible. The harvesting for sparkling wines doesn't differ a lot. For better quality wines, the grapes are normally hand-picked. For cheaper wines, machine harvested. It's nothing special here. After the harvest, the grapes are pressed, and the most interesting part is the next one. There are 6 methods of producing sparkling wine, and the qualities, the flavors and aromas will depend totally on these 6 methods. The first one, probably the oldest and considered to give the most high quality wines, is the traditional method. Once the base wine is made, it is that simple low alcohol 10-11% ABV white wine which serves as a base for future sparkling wine. The winemakers make the blending. They take the base wines made in different years in order to reproduce the taste of the house of the sparkling wine, like Moët champagne always has the same taste, right? I'm not talking about the premium lines like Dom Perignon, but just the basic champagne Moët Imperial. It is always impeccable and it is always the same. And in order to achieve that, the winemakers have to blend basic wines made in different years, because the climatic conditions change each year. One year is a bit warmer, other is cooler, one has more rain, another less rain, and as a consequence, the wine will be different. But Moët Imperial has to be Moët Imperial, always excellent and always the same. So they blend basic wine made in different years in order to achieve consistent quality. Then they add some so-called liqueur de tirage to the bottle. Liqueur de tirage is basically a mixture of base wine, sugar and yeast, which provokes second fermentation in wine. Yeast eat sugar, produce a bit of alcohol, but because of the fact that it all happens in a sealed bottle, the CO2 has no other way than to remain diluted in the wine. This is how the traditional method sparkling wine gets its bubbles. The second fermentation takes place inside the same bottle in which the wine will be sold to the customer in a supermarket or in a restaurant. That is the main difference of the traditional method versus methods which involve a lot of racking of wine from one vessel to another. When the work of the yeast is done, they have converted all sugar into alcohol and CO2. They die and form lees. Sometimes the wine remains in contact with this lees. This is why champagne always has its characteristic aromas of brioche, fresh bed, this kind of things. Then the dead yeast has to be removed from the bottle. The process is called riddling, which is basically turning the bottles really slowly. This process may take like 4-6 weeks if made manually. Sometimes it is made in a matter of days if made by a machine. They turn the bottles from a horizontal position into vertical position with the neck of the bottle pointing down. Like the lees fall down, then the neck of the bottle is chilled, the crown cap is open, the lees fly out of the bottle with some wine. Then the bottle is topped up with the same wine if we are producing brut nature, meaning that is no extra sugar added in the sparkling wine, or with a mixture of wine and sugar in order to make the wine a little bit sweeter. Personally, I prefer brut nature, but some people consider it too acidic and prefer just brut or even demi-sec champagne, which has a considerable amount of added sugar. And then the bottle is sealed once again, this time with the natural cork. And if it doesn't require any bottle aging, it can be sold directly to the distributors. If winemaker decides to age the wine for some time, then this bottle occupies the place in the cellar for some months or even years, and only then it is released to sale. As you can see, the traditional method is very labor intensive. There are a lot of movements, like second fermentation takes place in the same bottle, which the customer will see on his or her table. A lot of like this riddling, sometimes it is even manual, and all these rituals make champagne. Of course, there are a lot of other regions in the world which produce traditional method sparkling wines, but champagne will always be champagne, like the most luxurious, the most well-known, and the most expensive as well. The second method of making sparkling wine is the transfer method, which is basically a cheaper version of the traditional method. The whole process is the same before riddling, like turning the bottles in order to collect dead yeast near the cap. In the transfer method, they do it way simpler. They just pour all the wine into one big tank, filtrate the lees, and then pour the wines into new bottles. This little trick allows you to save time and cut the production costs, because the producer doesn't need to wait for the riddling to be done. Then to make the dosage, top up each of the bottles with like wine and sugar. They just do it in one big stainless steel tank, which is way more effective. It is extremely difficult, almost impossible, to distinguish traditional method and transfer method sparkling wines in blind tasting, because they have exactly the same characteristics. But the wine made by transfer method don't have the prestige of the traditional method. They still can write bottle fermentation on the label, but they cannot state traditional method or fermented in this bottle, because the bottles are different. These are the tiny differences that at the end of the day influence the price of wine. The third method is called the ancestral method. The precise technology may differ a bit depending on the winemaker's decisions, but that is basically the philosophy of the ancestral method. So we partially fermented grape juice, it is bottled and then sealed. The rest of the CO2 produced during the fermentation remains inside the wine, and then the bottle is just sold to the customer. This method is a bit quirky because there is almost no way to control the quality of the final wine. It's like all made by itself, but these wines are gaining a lot of popularity now because of its naturality and authenticity. So this is how pet nuts are made. It is the shortening from the French pétillance naturelle, which means like natural bubbles. The fourth method, it is the least expensive one used to make quality wines. There is one more which is even cheaper than that, but those wines cannot be high quality. The first fermentation for the tank methods takes place in the stainless steel tank And the second fermentation also takes place in a stainless steel tank, but only pressurized, like sealed, so that CO2 remains inside the wine. This method is the most cost-effective because it involves no riddling, even no racking from one bottle to another. Everything is very simple. The wine is produced in big volumes and then just bottled and sold. All the Prosecco wines are made using this tank method. This method is called tank method. And that is why Prosecco is often way cheaper than the champagne, because it involves really less work compared to champagne. The fifth method is called Asti method, and it is used to produce like sweet Asti wines, the Italian wines. The main difference here is that the juice is not fermented till dry. In Asti, there is normally about like 6.57% ABV, so the fermentation is stopped when there is still a lot of natural sugar in wine. The resulting wine is like easy drinking, very sweet, low in alcohol. It is made from Moscato grapes. Asti is basically the style of the wine you get using this method. And the last method is just adding CO2 directly to the wine, like they add CO2 to Coca-Cola. I won't focus on this method because it is used to produce the lowest quality wines. In lots of regions of the world, it is officially prohibited to make wine like that. So these are the cheapest sparkling wines. Sparkling wines are always associated with celebrations, with some special occasions. And if you want to know my opinion on that, my choice is just simple non-vintage champagne, if it is possible with zero dosage, meaning that is no extra sugar added. Vintage champagne means that all the wines which form the blend were made exactly this year. When the conditions are very good for winemaking, champagne houses launch like special vintage series, which obviously cost more. But I personally think that champagne is not only about the quality of the grapes and the weather conditions when these grapes grow. It is also about the mastery of the producer to deliver consistent quality over the years. This is, in my humble opinion, the true mastery of sparkling winemaking. And that is why champagne costs what it costs. And now let me say just a couple of words about fortified wines. I won't go too deep into details about fortified wines, but the most important question here is why? Why would people decide to add spirits to wine? Well, back in the days, it was just a smart way to save wine from spoiling. High alcohol served as a natural preservative for wine, just like sugar in jams or salt in salted kinds of meat like Italian prosciutto or Spanish jamon. There are a lot of different kinds of fortified wines, but the most well-known are Portuguese port wine and Spanish sherry wine. And there is one huge difference between them, apart from the fact that sherry is white and port wine is red. Port wine is fortified with 70-75% ABV aguardente, which is a Portuguese word for spirit, basically. It means that in order to achieve about 20% ABV in port wine, they need to add a lot of this aguardente. It basically means that when you drink port wine, you drink at least 20% spirit and about 80% of wine. So port wine is some kind of a peculiar mix of wine and strong beverage. Spanish sherry is totally different in this sense. It is fortified with pure alcohol and no more than 3-4% of sherry wine is actually a spirit. So it is still more like wine with a little bit of additive to it. Another common misconception about fortified wines is that they are always sweet. Yes, probably the majority of fortified wines are indeed sweet, just because in order to balance this extreme high alcohol, you need to add some counterbalancing components, which may be sugar. But at the same time, fortified wines can be bone dry, like Fino sherry, for instance. About sherry, there cannot be lots of options. You either hate it or you love it. And I personally hate it. Honestly, I just don't like sherry. I mean, no offense to people who enjoy it, but it's just not my cup of tea, as the British say. For me, I'd rather have a glass of champagne or some still wine or even a cold beer. But sherry, I don't know. I've tasted Fino Amontillado, Pedro Jimenez sherry at different price points, but I just didn't understand this wine. Although It's a great wine, no doubt about that. And yeah, we already know at least a bit about the production of white, red, and sparkling wines. And now let's go to the most interesting part, to the tasting. Stay tuned. Alright, we've come to the most exciting part of our talk, the tasting. This one will be a short prompt of how to taste wine in order to enjoy them to the fullest. And every wine tasting starts with the glasses. Here I have some of the glasses. All of them have different forms, longer stem, shorter stem, no stem at all. But basically, we don't even need all that to enjoy wine. Amongst these 6 glasses, there are 2 that don't serve very well for wine tasting and 4 glasses that manage okay with this task. The main requirement for the glass, which is good for wine tasting, is the presence of some kind of a bowl. The bowl is very important so that the wine could interact with the oxygen present in the air and uncover its flavors and aromas. Oxygen is poison to wine if it interacts for too long, but it is necessary to open up the aromas just before drinking the wine. That is why sometimes they use special decanters to aerate wine, but probably a bit later about that. Now, about the glasses. Personally, I don't like this flute glass here because it doesn't have any kind of a bowl for the wine to interact with the air. It is okay for sparkling wines because it has a very thin body and you see all the beautiful bubbles, but actually you cannot taste the wine well in this flute. Flutes are okay to see the wine, but definitely not okay to drink the wine. And despite the fact that this one is not very well made, the glass is not thin, I think. It is made of rather thick glass. It doesn't influence directly the taste of the wine, but deteriorates a little bit the whole experience because obviously it is more pleasant to drink wine from a well-made glass, probably like this one, rather than from this one, but generally it's still okay. What I don't like here in this glass is the rim of the glass, like the top of the bowl. It is not narrowing down like here, for instance, in order to provide more intense aroma experience to us, to those who are tasting the wine from this glass. And it is very important that the glass had at least some narrowing at the top of the bowl in order to accumulate wine aromas in this upper part, leading to the nose of the person who is tasting the wine. As you can see in all of these other glasses, except for the flute, they have some kind of a narrowing to the top, so I consider them to be good glasses. This one, without a stem, I think it is also okay because basically the only purpose of the stem is to prevent you from contacting the bowl by your hands and like this altering the temperature of the wine. But if the wine probably it is too chilled, you can warm it up, like take it like this, holding the bowl in 2 hands, and there is nothing wrong with that. Probably this glass without a stem is not the best option for summer because fresh white wines in summer are always warming up too soon, and taking it like this by a bowl, you make it even worse. But some not very expensive wines, if you want to drink them in autumn or in winter, like why not? It is totally appropriate. I wouldn't recommend this one to drink the most expensive wines like Grand Cru Bordeaux because it doesn't give you the whole experience of the wine, but definitely I prefer this one to these 2. Then we have this wine glass here. It's like the most basic wine glass. It's okay for both red wines and white wines. Not too big, it's not too small. It has a good shape of a bowl. It is made from rather good quality glass, although it's not Riedel or Spiegelau or any fancy brand like these 2, but it is still a rather good glass for any occasion, for basically any wine. And this glass here reminds me of this enormous in volume Grand Cru glasses. It is possible, I think, to pour the entire bottle of wine here, but personally I don't think that this kind of glass is appropriate for any occasion. The purpose of this gigantic bowl is to aerate better the wine, so probably if you just want to meditate with a glass of wine, give it more space and air so that potentially if a wine suffers from a bit of reduction, it could improve its quality in this glass. so that you even don't need a decanter. You don't need to decant the wine using this glass, probably. It happens sometimes to more old wines, I mean the reduction. Some more expensive wines need this kind of glass to open up better, but it is definitely not a glass for everyday wines. It is good for special occasions and for special wines, but we don't drink special wines on daily basis, right? And then we have this one little here. It is a degustational glass. You pour just 50 milliliters of wine here and you already can taste all the flavors and aromas. If you pour the same 50 milliliters in this gigantic bowl, you will taste basically nothing because it's just too big. This one is a glass I got when I was studying for my sommelier exam in Milan, so it's just, for me, it's just a nice souvenir to cherish the memories, but I still use this glass to taste a lot of wines at home. The main advantage of this is that you can pour less and consequently drink less, which is probably better for your health, but taste the same flavors and aromas. So basically, when I drink wine at home, I choose from these two options. Normally, this one is for drinking and this one is for tasting, I'd say. If you have some extra money but are not sure about which kind of glass you need for your wines, you can just go for a universal wine glass of a well-known brand like Riedler Spiegelau. They cost about 25 to 35 euros per glass, which is not cheap at all, but it is a quality glass for any occasion. As well, you can buy one of these, which is even cheaper, but it is still an okay glass for everyday wines. But enough talk about the glasses, let's pop some corks and pour some wine. If the wine is sealed with a screw cap, it is very easy to open a bottle. You just twist and it's done. If it is sealed with a natural cork or some kind of agglomerated cork, we just need to cut the foil here under the second lip of the bottle here. You can do it basically with any knife you have. If you have a sommelier knife like this here, so I'll try to use this one right now. Then what we do is we cut through the cap in order to remove it, like this. And then it's all done. Like you have to have some kind of a cloth to clear the neck. I don't have one here. And then we have to pull out the cork. In order to do that, you need to have some kind of a corkscrew. This one I have here, it is definitely not the best sommelier knife ever created. It has only one stage here. So you basically screw about a third into the cork, then pull a little bit, then screw a bit more, pull a bit more, and do like this 3-4 times, short movements in order to remove this cork. It's a little bit time consuming and it's not often very comfortable to do. Well, there is still an option to get a screw all the way down, a corkscrew all the way down, and then pull with all strength, but it requires long years of workouts in the gym, or just putting the bottle between your legs, holding the bottle, which is also not a very comfortable, good way to open a bottle of wine. I'll just try to open it like this. And finally it is done. So as you can see, it's really a little bit time consuming. If you have a 2-stage corkscrew, it is way easier, and probably I should purchase one of these, not to have fun with this 1-stage corkscrew every time I open a bottle of wine. When the cork is removed, you just have a quick glance at it. It should be just moist here. If it is moist, it means that the wine has stored in correct horizontal position. Moist cork seals a bottle better and it doesn't allow any extra air inside apart from the air which can enter through the cork. If the cork is not moist, and you see it probably in a restaurant, probably the wine was not stored well. In our case, the cork is moist, everything is fine here. Now we have to pour a little bit of this into the glass. Well, I definitely have to have some cloth, but okay, try to pour it like that. Maybe you can try to use a napkin to catch some drops. Don't pour too much. For tasting glass like this one, it is about 50 milliliters, as I've already said. For normal sized glass like this one, it is 125 milliliters. Sometimes they pour 150 milliliters. And then we just look at the wine in order to evaluate it visually. Professional sommeliers have to describe its color, the depth of color, but as long as we are just enjoying wine here, you may just take some notes for yourself. What is the color of this wine? To me, it's like probably pale lemon, I'd say, medium lemon. It is not really very intense. The rule of thumb is that the more intense the color of the wine is, the more intense aromas and flavors of the wine for whites you expect from this wine. And it is not always the same for reds. For reds, it really depends. And now let's evaluate the nose of the wine, or just sniff the wine. First of all, we put the nose inside the glass and try to sniff just a tiny bit, almost like no inhale. Do you smell something already? If it is so, it means that the wine is intense on the nose. For this wine, I cannot smell a lot, really, so it's definitely not intense. And when we inhale, trying to capture as many aromas as we can. So you inhale. If now you smell a lot of different aromas, they seem quite pronounced now, it means that the wine is probably medium intensity on the nose. If you still smell nothing, well, okay, the wine is low intensity on the nose. A rule of thumb here is that better quality wines made from better quality grapes tend to have more intense aromas. Remember this part about growing grapes, that the vine should suffer in order to develop any kinds of aromas and all that stuff. And here we come to taste this wine. We just taste it, try to cover with the wine all the taste bumps we have in our mouth. Then we try to identify what this wine smells like and try to classify these characteristics. And just do like this in order to add a little bit more air to taste better the aromas. First of all, you have primary aromas. Primary aromas are present in any wine and they are just derivatives from the grapes. These are formed by the peculiarities of each grape variety. For white wines, it may be some green fruit like green apple, quince. Then if the grapes had a little bit more sun, it can be like citrus, lime, lemon, grapefruit, these types of fruit. Then we have stone fruit like peach, nectarine, and on the top of everything we have tropical fruit like mango, lychee, pineapple, passion fruit, these kinds of fruit. And the basic pattern is the warmer the climate, the sweeter the fruit. If it's like a Sauvignon Blanc from Loire Valley, probably it will have some greenish aromas of apple, citrus. The same Sauvignon Blanc in warmer climates like some regions of New Zealand, for instance, it will be more on the tropical side. Of course, it also depends on the grape variety, but you just got my idea. In red wines, we decide either the wine is on the red or on the black side. Red fruits are more common for whites from lighter grapes like Pinot Noir, Gamay, some Pinotage probably. And more strong varieties normally have either both or only black fruit aromas like Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Mourvedre. Of course, there may be a lot of other hints of some herbal notes, some pepper, some minerality, like kind of licking stones, that kind of feeling. That is the most precise way I can describe minerality in wine. Some floral notes as well, some blossom, but it really depends on the particular wine. And basically, the more diverse and more intense these aromas are, the better quality the wine is. Obviously, there is a ton of exceptions, like Pinot Noir cannot be too intense because it's like probably the most elegant grape, giving wines with some subtle yet sophisticated aromas. Generally, if we don't smell a lot of everything in wine, probably it is not a very pricey wine. It's the main 101, like this one here. It doesn't smell like anything, basically. I just say it is the most basic wine you can think of. Probably some citrus, some apple, but actually nothing more than that. Yeah, some citrus, probably a little bit of stone fruit, like nectarine, white nectarine. It is okay to drink this wine on summer evening, but definitely it won't give you some notable tasting experience. And then we go for secondary aromas. You remember it from the chapters about red and white winemaking. Basically, secondary aromas are added to the wine in the winery during some manipulations with the wine. For white wine, secondary aromas may be least contact. Remember, the bodies of the yeast fall down and winemaker decides to leave them in contact with the wine for some time or not. Then we have malolactic conversion, aromas of butter, cream, champagne, remember that type of thing. And then it may be oak aging, which may give some extra characteristic oaky aromas to both white and red wines. Here in the glass, I just cannot smell any of that bread, cream, brioche, butter, nothing. Obviously, no oak. Oak may appear in different forms in wine depending on the duration of the maturation in barrel. It also depends on the type of the oak. It may be French oak or American oak. Some wineries use Caucasian oak as well. The volume of the barrel, it also influences the aromas. Either it is first use of the barrel or it's not the first use. And the toasting of the oak. Most characteristic aromas of oak are vanilla, cloves for red wines, charred wood, toast, some coconut, especially for American oak. Again, this wine, I cannot taste anything like that, so I just assume that this wine had no least contact, no malolactic conversion, no oak. It's just pure and simple primary aromas, so I assume that probably it is a young wine. And then in some wines we have tertiary aromas. These made during bottle aging, some part of the primary aromas is converted into tertiary aromas. So like cherry is converted into dried cherry, apricot is converted into dried or cooked apricot as well. Some wines develop very interesting tertiary aromas, special for each grape varieties, like Riesling develops petrol-like aromas. Some grapes get some honey, nutty notes, but it also depends on the particular wine, and that is the most like mind-blowing part about the wine for me. Out of the same grape variety, two winemakers can make absolutely different styles of wine, meaning that each wine is unique in some way. And basically that is the part I like the most in wine, because every wine tells its story, the story of the place, of the winemaker's family, of the weather during the season, all that. To me, it is the reason why I am into wine and why I try to stay curious about that. Obviously, nothing of tertiary aromas here, so this wine has only primary aromas, meaning that it's not very labor-intensive wine, high volume, rather cheap wine, and it is actually cheap and high volume wine. Does it mean that every good wine should have all these three kinds of aromas, primary, secondary, tertiary? Not necessary, but it should have at least two, I'd say. Like, it could be a great Chablis wine, but a young Chablis. So it doesn't have any tertiary aromas because it had no bottle aging. It's just a young Chablis wine, but it is still made from the top quality grapes and had some least contact, some malolactic conversion, like 6 months in the barrel probably. Is it a good wine? Absolutely, it's a very good wine. But still, it just lacks a bit of complexity for us to name it a great wine. And then we taste the wine. Well, we've already tasted it, but let's do it once again. And what do we have here? No sweetness, it's bone dry. Sometimes producers leave just a tiny bit of sugar in wine just to make the wine a bit more fruity and bright. This is probably the dirtiest trick a winemaker may do because it's like cheating. The wine seems better on the palate, but actually it is not better. It's just a couple of grams of sugar added to the wine or not completely converted into alcohol. These couple of grams are really very difficult to distinguish. But anyway, here I taste no sugar at all. This wine is definitely dry. It has a good acidity, and I suppose they added some acid to this wine in the winery because the grapes for this wine are grown in Spain. It's written here, wine from Spain, just no other regional naming. I already know that it is not an expensive wine, high volume wine. They do add some acids to cheaper wines to just make it balanced. So I assume that they added something to elevate the acidity level of this wine. This wine is not high in alcohol, it's like 12% ABV. And basically, alcohol contributes to the body. The wine seems more full-bodied. Like if you have ever tried non-alcoholic wines, you know what I mean. It smells like wine, but doesn't have any body at all. It seems more like water, not like wine, because there is no alcohol there. The body of wine is a tricky concept because there are a lot of factors contributing to it. Acidity makes the body thinner, but alcohol and sugar make it bigger. Complexity, a lot of aromas also make a wine like more full-bodied. This wine is definitely not a full-bodied wine because it doesn't have a lot of alcohol, it doesn't have a lot of flavors to it, no sugar, rather high acidity, so the body is rather thin, I'd say. But on the contrary, if we take some bold red wine like Australian Shiraz, or I absolutely love good Australian Shiraz, it's a gorgeous wine, it is definitely full-bodied because it has plenty of alcohol, a lot of primary aromas, secondary, tertiary, so it seems very dense on the palate. Basically, the majority of the flavors copy the aromas in wine, but there may be something missing, something extra. It depends on the particular wine. If the wine delivers on the palate more, the flavors seem to be more complex and intense than on the nose. It is a good sign. This one here, I'd say that it is not over-delivering on the palate, but on the other hand, flavors don't seem worse than the aromas. Sometimes it may be the opposite. Flavors seem more flabby and less interesting, and the wine seems a bit disappointing. In this case, like, it's not about that. It's just, it is what it is. And the last thing we want to cherish in wine is the finish. The longer it is, the better the wine is. There are no discrepancies here. You feel the taste of some wines for about a minute, sometimes even more after you swallow or spit the wine into the spittoon, but some wines just disappear in a couple of seconds. Obviously, you want to savor the wine for as long as possible, so the longer the finish is, the better quality wine you have. You already understand that there is nothing special to expect from this wine. It doesn't last forever. The finish is predictably relatively short. And now, more or less, we are aware if it is a pricey one, if it is a good one, a bad one, simple or complex, high or low quality. And most importantly, we understood whether we like it or not. It is the most important thing in wine. I think you should just enjoy it. If a bottle costs $1,000 but you don't like the wine, it's no use, right? To me, it totally depends just on two things: today's mood and the food I'm pairing the wine with. If I don't feel like drinking complex wine today, I won't enjoy it anyway. And vice versa. If I want something thought-provoking to meditate with a glass of wine and I'm offered something like this, just a simple white wine, I will be disappointed. The mood changes, but the wine and food pairings stay more or less consistent. And in the last chapter, we'll talk about that. Pairing wine with food is probably the most complicated part of the sommelier work because every person is unique, and even the most commonly accepted pairing may not work for the particular person. That is why I won't advise you on some precise pairings, but I'll try to just give a couple of guidelines on how you could possibly get a nice pairing of food and wine, and keep in mind that it may not work particularly for your taste. The most common rule is to pair food and wine similar in weight. Like if it is a low-calorie vegetables and chicken dish, pair it with simple white wine. We've talked about such wine just in the last chapter. If it is a beef steak, go for bold red wine. It sounds very basic, but in fact, it is the most important recommendation because it never fails. There are very few people on earth who enjoy raw beef steak with a glass of simple French muscadet wine. Probably there are still a couple of them, but it is a really very unconventional pairing. For 99.9% of people, the more high in protein, calories, fat the food is, the more full-bodied should be the wine, because wine serves, in this case, as a palate cleanser. You chew a bit of the dish, then you have a sip of a wine, and then you are ready for the next bite. Your palate is once again ready for it. And there is no fat left in the mouth, wine has carried it away, and every bite seems like the first one. Your taste buds are not being tired of too heavy food. And the next tip is about the acidity. Make the pairing based on the acidity of the dish and the wine. because milk doesn't go well with acid, with some lemon. Okay, it means that for dishes with rich creamy sauces, the best option would be to pair it with not a very acidic wine. It is based just on a simple logic that milky creamy flavors normally are not perceived well when paired with something too acidic, like a lemon, for instance. For a creamy sauce, the best option could be an oak chardonnay from a warmer region, which still has some acidity to it, but not too much as like Chablis wines or some Riesling, for instance. And on the contrary, if the food is too high in acidity, contains some lemon juice probably or something like that, the best option would be a crisp wine high in acidity like a German Riesling, like Champagne, probably some Spanish Albarino or some Portuguese Vinho Verde. Then the third advice is to pair wine by sweetness. The basic rule here is that the wine should be just a little bit less sweet than the dessert, because if we have some luscious Pedro Jimenez sherry with not so sweet panna cotta dessert, for instance, the wine will take over the dessert and you'll basically taste nothing eating your dish. And wine is a part of food, it's a complement to food, and it should not overtake it. Sweet wine is also a great pairing to Asian dishes high in spices, because spicy dishes kill just all the flavors in wine and only make the alcohol burn in the palate worse by spices, or better say that the alcohol makes the burn from the spices worse. That is why a good option for spicy, like Asian style food, maybe some naturally semi-sweet or semi-dry Riesling. It's not very high in alcohol because Riesling is normally cultivated in some cooler regions, so the grapes don't accumulate lots of sugar. And at the same time, winemakers decide to retain a significant amount of this sugar in wine in order to make the wine naturally sweet. So a white wine with some sugar, like not more than 10% ABV, may be just a good pairing for some spicy Asian dish. Another option to pair food with wine is local wine for local food. I've said this a million times in the videos on my channel, but it is so important, I just cannot ignore it here. Obviously, if Thai food is your choice for today, probably you wouldn't pair it with Thai wine, but why not? They also produce some wine and sometimes it is even not bad. But if your dinner is Italian, French or Spanish style, it would be disrespectful for culinary traditions of the country not to pair it with some local wine. And try to pair by region and not only by the country, because French food is too diverse and the wines as well, so you need to identify where the dish comes from and then decide on the wine pairing. Like seafood goes especially well with some white wines from the Loire Valley, and Entrecôte Bordelaise pairs well with Bordeaux wines. And probably the most popular statement, not only for wine pairing, but generally in the world of wine, is white wine for fish, red wine for red meat. I would be very glad to say that it is wrong, it's just a myth, but it is not. In 90% of the cases, I'd say it really works. Basically, what makes red meat go well with red wines is fat and salt, because normally meat dishes are high in both of them. A typically bold steak wine like Malbec from Argentina or a Bordeaux works well because of the salt of the meat, because of the salt in the meat. And the statement about white wines and fish is based on that a lot of fish has like oily structure, like if we are not talking about cod fish, but about some salmon, for instance. White wines high in acidity better cut through the fish fat and don't give the food some metallic aftertaste, which is not particularly pleasant, and which you can get if you pair some fatty fish with some red wines. There may be some options when it's better to pair fish with red wine, especially if the fish is high in umami taste, but generally white for seafood and red for red meat is a good pair, and you can stick to that, no problem. And yeah, that is it. Hope that you liked this little course. This is just an introductory course, so I didn't go too much in detail about all the aspects of the world of wine. I hope you've discovered something interesting and something new for you. Feel free to contact me on Instagram and comments on YouTube, or directly by email if you are subscribed to my newsletter. If you want to give some feedback or suggest some other course that you would like to see, or some other wine and fine dining related activity you would like to experience, I will probably start working on a more advanced course for wine lovers with some experience. Write me back if you want to see some kind of a more in-depth course about different wine regions of the world, probably with some wine tasting, wine suggestions for tasting. Like, you'll have a list of wines to buy at home and we will taste them together. I'm here in my cozy studio and you're at your cozy home. Any suggestions basically are welcomed, even the craziest ones. Once again, thanks for watching and see you shortly. Bye.